All right, good morning and welcome to Web3 Wednesdays, where we chat through some of the complex and nuanced topics in crypto and Web3 at large so that you can stay ahead of the curve. So today I'm joined by Jonah Blake, the founder of Game Fund Partners Group, an organization that broadly participates in ventures across both Web2 and Web3 gaming. And he's also the founder and CEO of RE3W, a research and content creation group that sits at something that looks like the nexus of IGN, Bloomberg, and Messari. So Jonah's experience in venture investing across both Web2 and Web3, as well as extensive content creation and ideation around gaming in general, make him a fantastic resource for tapping into the foremost innovations in Web3 gaming. So we're keen to get his take on the Web2 to Web3 transition. Jonah, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully I don't bore your audience too much.
Oh, no, I'm sure they're going to love it. No, let's jump right into it. Traditional gaming company models, right, from a basic financial perspective, let's just start at first principles. Do you see them being actually challenged by the rise of Web3 gaming?
I think it's a simple question with a really complex multi-year answer. The answer is yes and no. No being, quite frankly, publishers, for all the flack publishers get from real players, they provide extensive value to a lot of the studios that certainly can't afford marketing or distribution, or are not tapped into the sort of network that maybe an Activision or a Riot or an EA would provide. And their decades of work in the business has, really created this web of influence from, game ideation all the way to deployment. And that there's no amount of money in the world that could generate an automatic network like that. That's something that's built over decades of just natural good work. And Web3 gaming has, if Web3 gaming was to be siloed from the industry of gaming generally, of Web2 gaming generally, it would face many years of obstacles of growth to get there. So the advantage of Web2 game companies is, of course, where they're at in the industry currently and their value in the market and their network. Where I see Web2 companies sort of not so much afraid of or concerned about is the same thing that mainstream Hollywood is concerned with now, which is value in IP, specifically around incubating new IP. We've seen a significant amount of funding, over $1 billion. I forget the exact number, but at least over $1 billion in funding allocated to Web3 gaming, specifically around new titles that maybe a publisher or another group would have invested in or would have kept under their umbrella. And, Master Chief, can't be Master Chief forever. At some point, you have to have a refresh of content. And most innovative IP or next-gen IP will come from these indie and AA studios that are receiving this Web3 funding. So I don't think they see them as a concern, more so as they're waiting for the market to mature before Web2 companies sort of try and either acquire or merge into the industry. We saw that this week with PlayStation Stars, where Sony did not say NFT. They specified they were not NFTs. But if you read between the lines, it's very clear they're beginning probably a 10-year strategy on how to eventually grow acceptance in the space, especially highlighting the phrase collectibles multiple times in their blog.
Yeah, I agree. It's things like that are kind of these subtle moves from the big boys in the room, right? Who are like really trying to like maybe step into Web3, but don't want to step into the whole mess, like Ubisoft backlash, et cetera, earlier this year, right? So no, I completely agree with that across the board. I also like that you brought up publishers here, right? And if we were to really broadly bin, the whole gaming industry, let's say games, publishers, community tools. Okay, so that's your stuff. You got your, that would include all your forum tools, your messenger tools over there, as well as your giant publishers, and of course the games in the middle. Which ones of those do you see as most ripe for immediate disruption with respect to actual, like large user bases, bigger than what traditional Web3 gaming is seeing right now? Where do you think the first wave of adoption is going to hit?
It's an interesting question because we already have the technical tools and the community tools. One thing that Web3 doesn't really acknowledge is, yes, the ethos is decentralization, but much of Ethereum, as well as most decentralized apps, run through several node providers, and then those node providers rely on AWS, which is a very centralized company. So we're more Web 2.5. So if you look at it from that perspective, and disclaimer, we are investors in Discord. I like Discord. That's a community tool that has over 50 million monthly active users, and these people are all, or most of them are all hardcore gamers or avid gamers, and sort of a deviation of like Slack, where it's professional chat. So we have communication tools where disruption is occurring. Of course, there are issues with Discord like any other app. The publishing model, I see it being disrupted through DAOs, but I don't see that happening for a number of years, because the publishing model of incubation, financing, and then distribution is one, very network heavy and top heavy. Like, you're hiring executives that have been in the industry for decades that are actually really good at their job and have extensive network to make these deals happen. And the ethos of a DAO is that it's that, but it's a decentralized community of individuals contributing specific skill sets to create this publishing web. I also think there's disruption on the wallet side, crypto wallets. I think people don't understand that there are two inventions of Web3 that I think are going to stand the test of time and become incredible for almost every consumer industry. Wallet, Web3, cold or hot wallet, cold or hot storage, and well, I want to say DAOs, but also not DAOs. But I think DAOs is a part of it, because DAOs aren't even really DAOs now, and that will be a 2-hour-long conversation about how.
Don't worry, I've written a very long piece about complaining on exactly that topic.
So the reason wallets are revolutionary for gaming is at least two parts. The first being data. Most gaming data is I wouldn't say hidden, but not disclosed, because most gaming companies are private. And if they're publishers that are public on the market, they're not going to divulge all of their data, because it may be proprietary or things that are for their IPs. With wallets and with game assets, NFT assets, you have an unprecedented exposure to data and consumer habits, that where your business becomes transcribing that data rather than just collecting it. And I think there's going to be a mass value on transcribing or creating data that is actionable over openly accessible sets of data, rather than harvesting the data privately, reselling that data, and allowing someone else to privately transcribe that data. So that's one reason that wallets will be revolutionary for gaming. The second is identity, and the identity being you can use one wallet within, I call it an ecosystem rather than a blockchain, because they even, like Ethereum has like 4 ecosystems, because just it's layer 1, but all the gaming happens on like 3 or 4 layer 2s. That identity and cross compatibility, not around the assets or composable assets, but around your user accounts, is going to be very important for building what we're all here calling the metaverse, which is your internet equivalent to a social security number or ID passport.
I think that's fair. This idea of actionable data being so available in Web3, this is something that people haven't really tapped into at all yet, right? I mean, arguably, you have some white hat to gray hat to black hat hackers who are doing some interesting things with, data right now to try to find ways to exploit certain chain ecosystems. But I think from a consumer perspective and from like a product focused KPI perspective, even, I haven't actually seen anything yet, that would be really, really impressive making use of all this data. And there is going to be so much data, because I completely agree with you. From your perspective, have you seen anything that has been compelling to you? Have you seen anyone use user data, so far in a Web3 capacity that's been really compelling and might actually be a foundational, way of viewing it in the future?
Well, in terms of on a mass scale, no. I've seen like testing, and that's kind of why I started RE3W, was less on harvesting data and more transcription of that data. What I'm waiting for is standardization. Now, the problem with gaming standardization is not all games intake data the same. So you kind of have to take these APIs, or you have to create APIs even for some of these. You would take their data, reorganize their data, and you collect it and then send the data back to the game studio, because it's their data. So there's not a standardization in the market for how data is collected or measurement. We know in Web2 gaming what, your golden measurement is DAU, daily active user, monthly active user, or your rate of super users, or your churn rate, things like this, which is very common. But I think there's other types of measurement, which is like volume on assets, social sentiment on trade of a specific asset, especially when you talk about brands pulling, right? Like if you have a composable or you have a Gucci asset that's tradable, I'll give you an example. Roblox has this Gucci world that you can go to. I forget the name of it, but my buddy actually helped start it. They did really well, over 20 million impressions. They did measurement on daily active users, just like any physical store, churn rate, like, are they going into the store? Are they purchasing something? Are they leaving? They're more interested in viewer views and then like third party, like sort of views. But I'd be interested in other additional data, like when they bought that item, what else can we learn about what they did with that item? What if, for example, people who bought that item from their wallet, so, all right, scenario, Roblox has an ETH wallet, or they have their own wallet, and you buy a Gucci asset in Roblox, and we now know what their impressions are on that experience. But because now I can track a wallet ID without someone's personal information, because I have an ID on the asset itself, can I learn where they took that asset? If it's a composable asset, did they take it to Counter-Strike? So just as a scenario. If so, why? What did they do with that asset in Counter-Strike? Were they selling it on the Counter-Strike DEX or decentralized exchange? Were they wearing it? Were they letting a friend lend on it? Or did they take it to the Roblox world of Wendy's, right? So why was he wearing, or she wearing, or they wearing the Gucci item or selling the Gucci item at the Wendy's world? Maybe it turns out Wendy's has another brand activation that somehow actually meshes well with the Gucci experience. And now you can create these much larger metaverse activations where you have what I think clusters of data around, I would call it community cluster data. And I think that could be really groundbreaking for advertisers. I think it'd be groundbreaking for communities, and certainly DAOs who are operating in a decentralized community manner to create some sort of action.
Jonah, I think that's brilliant. I like that, top to bottom, because what you end up with is frankly, like, obviously, powerful advertising and product focused metrics that you can potentially monetize. But part of that, you could potentially preserve a lot of the user anonymity and take some of the dangerous components of Web2 around, obviously, like the infamous case of the 16-year-old girl who started getting, pregnancy related items from Target 6 months before she was actually due to give birth, because Target knew that she bought 6 items on specific days, right? Like, you can avoid that type of, identification with a human, and you can just capture this really, really powerful, advertising and product focused metrics. I think that's brilliant.
There's one other that's really cool, which no one's really doing it because it's hard to do, but I think it will exist, which is I would call it game asset DNA. A really interesting concept, which is so I buy an asset in Gucci. I go sell it on the Counter-Strike DEX. Again, scenario, this doesn't actually exist for people who are listening and don't game. This is not real, but it will be something like this in the future. I take my Gucci asset, and for whatever reason, I have like one composability token on it. So I bought a Gucci bag. Because I'm on the Counter-Strike DEX, I have a CSGO composable token, and because of that, I can now exchange it into a Gucci AK-47. And then I go take it to Wendy's and I can change it into a Gucci wrapped burger. Now, the difference in value is it's the same asset with the same DNA, but recomposed in this shared world. And not only could you track how it's composed or how it's restructured on the front end, on the model of it, you could have a chain of wallet IDs that bought and transferred like it's history, like it's a child of each wallet. And without knowing the person's identity, you could go into each of the past wallets based on the asset that's owned and learn about the types of buyers and sellers or the type of owner that had that wallet from like wallet A all the way to wallet Z.
So much data. Yep.
Yeah. So what it starts as like a Gucci bag, somehow down the line, like a year later, it becomes a McDonald's small fry. And you want to know how the hell all that happened, and the data and the IDs can like track all that. And I think we're still 5 to 10 years from that, but that's why I'm starting now, because I think 5 to 10 years that will happen.
No, I think that's a fair bet. I mean, and this is kind of where Web3 either gets really cool or really scary, right? Because Web3 and crypto/blockchain at large are either the most perfect government surveillance system ever created, right? Like absolute control over every transaction, or they are an anonymous, like semi-libertarian paradise, right? Where like everything is mostly free, you know, it's on you as to whether or not you actually make a mistake. And along that gradient, you know, data is going to fall somewhere in there, right? Like we either know and identify every single person, or we don't, and we go fully anonymous. But one way or another, the data is coming out, and the data is going to become more and more public over time. And so, you know, I think that's an impossible force to disagree with there. So I think that where you guys are building to makes a lot of sense.
It's just not good. There's no way to avoid data. We just have to find ways to collect it and be transparent ethically about it. And that's why I'm more interested. And again, I'm not like an expert data scientist. I'm more of an expert gamer, and I know how to invest in gaming. But what I do understand is why that makes sense for brands, why that makes sense for players, and certainly why. I mean, governments are going to want to collect data either way. There's no. I mean, I don't live in a fantasy land where there's this perfect anarchy world where governments don't exist and we're in internet countries, and I think that's amazing. I will write books about it fictionally. But let's talk about law for a second. Where are these servers based? If they're based in America, they're on American soil. I'm not a lawyer, but I would assume that means you abide by some sort of law in America, or you abide by a law in the EU, which has a bunch of privacy laws already, or whatever. It's, you know, now with Elon Musk's, I forget the satellite, Starlink, maybe that'll change, because I don't know. I don't know what the laws of space are.
I think it's maritime law is what applies up there technically, but it's a whole other field. Yeah.
The bottom line is that I don't like this idea that we live in these utopia fantasies on Web3, because then we don't build anything of real value to people who don't. To be quite honest, most people are not going to care about Web3 on the back end. They want to work their 9 to 5. They got to feed their kids, and then they want to watch TV and go to bed. It's not their job to know these sort of things, and I think that's a utopian-esque fallacy in our space.
Yeah, agreed. No, we have to remain focused on the end user, the product, you know, like what value is this driving to the ordinary consumer or the ordinary business, and just build around that. And, you know, kind of with respect to that, this is a very complicated question here, so I apologize in advance, right? But, you know, some people in Web3, you know, focus on this idea of staking as potentially a replacement for the traditional subscription-based model, right? And so subscription-based models exist in gaming today, as well as, you know, obviously free-to-play models. But there's always this, you know, kind of idea that's floating around in Web3 communities about, you know, maybe in the future you're going to stake to pay instead, and in that way you would own some proportional, you know, share of the company. What do you think about that? Is that a viable payment method? What does that look like in your eyes?
I don't have, my honest question is I don't know. My honest answer is I don't know, but I would respond with that question to another question. And from my understanding, proof of stake, well, not proof of, well, staking, the original idea was that it was staking for block space. It wasn't.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate misnomer. We had a piece out on that last week too.
Yeah, so there's a big difference, and I'm not a blockchain engineer, but I know enough about it to understand that there is a different terminology. But proof of stake is sort of meshed with this play to earn model, where, from what I understand lately, not that this is its intended use case, is that proof of stake is another word for, or staking, not proof of stake. Sorry, again, the misnomer. It's very confusing. We need to change the terminology. Staking has turned into the equivalent of, please don't sell your tokens today. Just sell your tokens tomorrow for a little more. But I wonder, from, you know, Web3 doesn't mean that business doesn't exist. My question would be, if staking is the form of subscription, how does the company that's providing service generate revenue? Because staking as subscription would assume that there's extracting and then like infusing value. If you're staking and there's no revenue made, but there's just an output of services, how is that company or DAO, whatever you would call it, still operating? How are they compensating their engineers or their writers or whatever it is, their product or services? I would ask you. I actually don't know how.
No, Jonah, I think it's a fantastic question. Yeah, it's one of those things that gets noodled around in communities, and overwhelmingly something that comes up, right, is that, let's take a DEX, for example, right? Let's say for some reason you have to stake to access a DEX, and that's your fee to use the DEX. But the DEX is generating fees because they're trading back and forth during the day. And let's also say, for the sake of the argument, that the DEX happens to be embedded inside of a game, and the game sells certain cosmetics and it generates revenue that way, right? And in that way, the stakers may or may not receive something that looks like revenue distributions. It doesn't matter, that gets messy, but they do stake and they like own part of the situation. And by staking, then they are somehow participating in the overall revenue scheme at hand.
So again, I'm not a lawyer, so no financial advice, but I think you know what I'm going to say next.
Of course.
So, just because we do have a lot of lawyers that I talk to, it does sound very much like a security, and and I'm not saying that it is, because I actually think it's a problem that we've kind of bucket certain values into either security or non-security. I think a lot like the views on gender and views on sexuality, there is a large scope of variety that I think we need to sort of understand, which we haven't, and I'm not sure if we will or won't, and it's not my place to make that decision. So the answer is, again, because I'm not going to say I know, I don't know how that will play out. I think it's a cool idea. I guess if I were to do that for my business or for my organization or company or community, I would think about it in the same way that Dota 2 does it. I don't know if you know about Dota 2.
No, tell me. I actually don't know how they do it.
So this is Dota, Defense of the Ancients. It's a MOBA game, very popular esport, more in Europe than in the US. League of Legends has sort of taken the place in terms of global popularity, although not necessarily true based on their size. So how Dota 2 works is they will create a prize pool yearly for what they call the International. That's their biggest esport event, based on the revenue generated that year.
Oh, that's right.
So they do commensurate prize pool. So I would, instead of looking at like a dividend or a royalty, I would look at it more like a prize pool treasury and try and see if there's a legal definition between the two. And I would say, look, every year that we generate value from subscriptions that you all pay, we take X% of our revenue, and it goes into a DAO managed or however managed open community treasury where you can view the pot on a minute-to-minute basis if you wanted to. And at the end of each quarter, at the end of each year, we will release those funds to certain wallets that have committed some action. That's my only concern. Like my part would be, does it look too much like a security? How are we generating enough revenue to sustain the organization? Because an organization is just a company that kind of gives more back, in my mind, to a degree. And then the other part would be, how much do I give so I don't start running at a negative, and then the organization shuts down, and then I can't continue doing prize pool. So it would have to be a moving target of an average each year based on performance, and then based on that, I would have to determine if the wallets in question have to commit some sort of action on a quarterly basis that I can monitor to determine if they've actually maybe operate more like contractors than they do like shareholders. Because if they operate like contractors, maybe there's some sort of method that I don't know of yet where I can write them in as a contracted potential employee type of structure, and then they could get some sort of earn rather than just sitting as shareholders. The only problem is most wallet IDs or most people would say, F you. We just want to make money and we don't want to do any actual work. So.
Yeah, let's hope Web3 evolves a little bit past that. But no, I totally appreciate the legal complexities at hand are immense, right? And for those of you actually that are listening and you haven't visited it yet, do take a look at Paradigm's piece on DAOs. Their DAO Matrix was a fantastic legal write-up. One last question here, and then I'll ask you a general question, and we can close it up here, Jonah. But considering the time that we've been in Web3 so far, right? Web3's had like a little bit of time, a hot second or two. What business models in general have you seen as, like being interesting and attractive in Web3 that you think even Web2 companies today might even be able to implement? And do any even exist? Maybe they're not even here.
So I'll think through each industry, and I won't try to make this a long-winded, boring thought. Gaming specifically with game assets, yes, because publishers and studios actually that's going to be very valuable to them. It's just another method of free to play with an additional royalty on the back end. If they can make a good game and they can make it less about the economy and more about just taking royalties on the back end of traded assets, that alone is good enough to warrant the value of the technology for a game studio. So gaming, yes. Fashion, I'm not sure yet, if I'm going to be quite honest with you, other than fashion works with gaming assets. And I'm not as skilled enough in fashion to know the answers there. Maybe there's something around supply side tracking, what we consider like eco-friendly fabrics or things that don't, like fast fashion causes insane pollution. So it wouldn't be a front-facing business, but more like a back-end tech that would, occupy the value of the fashion brand. Music, I think, has a lot of opportunity, but as I've spoken to a lot of people, it has a long way to go, and the industry itself is structured in such a way that I find it to be much more difficult to create music NFTs than people actually think, especially around rights and who gets what returns. It's not an as kind business, and it's hard to do. I think legal will be massive. I think law specifically. I just read, I don't know if it's accurate, so don't quote me. It might be fake news. But I just read somewhere that the UK is considering the idea of making it legal to airdrop a lawsuit to your wallet. I don't know if you read that.
Yeah, subpoenas have actually been served. I don't remember who, but someone has been served a subpoena. I don't know if it actually ended up holding up in court, but they have done that.
Like as an NFT airdrop to your wallet. I think that's hilarious, by the way.
I mean, because you technically have custody of it, and that's all that's required to serve someone is they have to have custody of the asset, which undeniably you do if you have the wallet. I guess you can always say that you lost the keys though, right? So
I think legal tech is going to have a big boom in the next cycle. I think you're going to see funds start with a specific mandate of playing a game of darts on legal tech companies that use smart contracts. Also, I mean, a company I'm looking for, I would love to like potentially be a part of, is a company that can create a back end like CMS, like a content system that allows you to input your game asset IDs, and then it'll pull up like the contract behind it and list based on the DNA of the game or the DNA of the ID holder, what IP rights they've already released to the brands, as well as what IP rights are clearly listed and available to release to another party. Basically a legal CMS for releasing IP rights around an NFT asset. I think that would be a unicorn company. I would love to see someone build that.
Jonah, in 25 minutes here, we've invented the next unicorn, solved world hunger, world peace.
I can go through each one and apply, but generally I think the answer is yes, with the caveat of one thing that people won't like me saying, but it's just truth in my opinion, my version of the truth, is that a lot of the problem with the NFT Web3 space specifically, not DEXs or DeFi, is that they're trying to take a technology and turn it into an industry when it's actually a tool set of various industries. And so you see a lot of people trying to say NFTs can cure cancer, NFTs can make a nuclear bomb, whatever it is, when really it's just the equivalent is like saying, it's like saying I'm an Excel spreadsheet influencer. And I think Excel should be used to go buy my tomatoes at Whole Foods. It's like, no, you use Excel at home to run your accounting or to make a fantasy sports betting list or certain things, but it doesn't define who you are. And I think that's the biggest problem is there are people who are trying to be everything when it's just one tool set of many.
I couldn't agree more. I always say that I hope that people never use the word NFT in a couple of years ever again, because to me it's like calling Chrome your HTTPS and TCP IP product. Like no one says that. Like you don't refer to it that way. It's the underlying technology.
A friend of mine told me that he was an HTTP influencer.
So, yeah, I mean he is. I'm sure he is. He is an HTTP. Yeah, that's it.
So yeah, no, that's my short and long answer on that one.
No, I love it, Jonah. I think that's fantastic. All right, we're going to wrap up here. I have one general question for you, and then you can have a moment to shout out anything you like. But, as an active participant yourself in Web3 ventures and, gaming ventures, what advice do you have for Web3 builders in the space who are trying to spin up their own projects? Do you have any major regrets or revelations that you've seen in the space that you'd want them to know?
From what I've seen, I'll think of one negative and one positive so I can remain neutral. Stop trying to solve things that aren't problems, right? You're trying to create a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. So before you even think about what it is you're going to create, you have to be honest with yourself and say, is my business solving a problem, or is it covering a niche that hasn't been served, that has a customer base? Like any business, Web2, Web3, Web 5. Like it's a basic thing that you have to think about. And I think the other thing is, the market is bad for many reasons, not just for crypto. It is a larger symptom of COVID and a number of other policies in the world that have gone on for many years. And I would just say, keep going, keep building. I think the only thing that you can do in a time like this is stay consistent. And if you're consistent, eventually you will be successful at what you do. I guess be consistent with intent, know what you're being consistent about. There are a number of companies in 2018 that were there during the crypto winter. I think one of them was like Cointelegraph. They were like a nothing company. And then
I remember meeting one of their first reporters back then. Yeah.
They were like nothing. They were like a little company. They were just a bunch of, people and really into the crypto space. They were probably making no money. And now it's 2022 and they're one of the largest publications in the world for crypto. And I can tell you they're making the bag. Like they're doing very well. So stay consistent.
I love it. No, just keep pounding away at it. I think that in general, optimism in the space is still quite high despite market conditions. So, I remain very personally optimistic as a builder and venture in the space. All right, Jonah, just in our last comments here, if you have anything you'd like to shout out or say or any last comments, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm a simple guy. Thanks for having me.
No.
Just thanks for having me. It's it was great meeting you in person and having lunch, and I like your show. I've listened to a few of your episodes, and I think you're going to just grow in popularity. So it's good. It's good to meet you now before you become too famous.
I love it, Jonah. That's very kind, guys. If you haven't followed Jonah yet on Twitter, also give him a follow. He does a great show, and they put out some solid content over there, and we really appreciate him coming on. Jonah, enjoy the rest of your day, man.